Emma wanted a quiet new start in Montana. Daniel promised her love, a cabin in the woods, and a forever that felt like a winter fairy tale. But when Emma's body was found frozen beneath the snow, with a bruise on her head and a photo on her phone of a shadow watching her, Daniel's promises shattered, revealing a deadly truth that would shake the entire town. Emma never planned to fall in love. When she came to the small Montana town, hoping to find quiet after leaving a long night shift life behind, she rented a small cabin near the edge of the forest, where pine trees whispered with every wind, and frost clung to the windows each morning. She liked the way the town slowed her down, how the roads were empty at dawn, and how even the snow seemed to move softly across the ground. Emma started spending her mornings walking through the town, with a coffee cup warming her hands, waving to the few early risers shoveling snow, or petting the dogs that roamed with frost on their fur. It was on one of these mornings that she met Daniel, a mechanic with dark hair and tired eyes, who was scraping ice off an old truck outside his garage. He offered her a ride when the wind turned sharp, and she hesitated, but something in the quiet way he spoke made her step into his truck, the heater humming while snowflakes melted on the windshield. Over the next few weeks, they became a familiar sight in town, Emma's red scarf bright against Daniel's heavy coat as they walked to the diner, sitting in a corner booth, sharing pies and coffee while the world outside stayed cold and white. Emma began to feel as if the town was exactly what she needed, and she told her sister she might stay longer, maybe even for good. She loved the sound of snow falling on the cabin roof at night, the way the stars burned cold in the sky, and how Daniel would drive her to frozen lakes, where they would watch the sunrise while their breath turned to clouds. But slowly, the warm glow of their new love began to shift. Emma noticed how Daniel sometimes clenched his jaw when his phone buzzed, stepping outside to answer calls in the cold, coming back with a forced smile. He started talking about building a cabin for them, about how she could work fewer hours, and they could live simply. But the idea began to feel like a cage to Emma, though she didn't say it out loud. She had found bills in Daniel's truck once, with red stamps she didn't understand, and when she asked, he shrugged, saying it was nothing, but the way his eyes darkened made her feel small. Emma tried to ignore the warnings in her head, telling herself it was just the stress of winter, that everyone had struggles, and that love meant staying even when it was hard. She posted photos of snow-dusted trees, of small fires in the cabin fireplace, and sometimes of Daniel, half smiling in the corner of the frame. She wanted to believe in the life they were building, in the promise of spring when the snow would melt and everything would be green again. But the nights grew colder, and the silence in the cabin grew heavier, filled with unspoken words that neither of them knew how to voice. Emma started waking in the night, hearing the wind, feeling a heaviness in her chest she could not name. She noticed how Daniel's truck would sometimes be gone when she woke, returning hours later with no explanation, his boots wet with snow. In town, people would glance at Emma nodding politely, but there was something in their eyes, a hesitation, as if they knew something she did not. She found herself scanning the forest when she walked, feeling watched, the cold biting at her skin, the quiet no longer comforting, but warning her in whispers she was not ready to hear. Emma's sister could not shake the feeling that something was wrong when Emma's messages stopped coming. At first, the silence was explained away by poor reception, the storms that swept across the Montana mountains, the cold that pressed in on the cabin and froze pipes and batteries. But after 3 days without a single text, the worry turned to fear that pressed into every breath, and her sister called the sheriff, her voice cracking as she explained that Emma would never simply leave without letting someone know where she was going. The sheriff's department treated it as a welfare check at first, driving out to the cabin that sat quiet beneath heavy snow, its windows dark, the steps leading to the porch hidden under drifts. They knocked, called Emma's name, but there was no answer except the sighing wind moving through the pine trees. Deputies circled the cabin, looking for signs of fresh footprints, but the snow had fallen heavy the night before, leaving a blank, cold sheet across the land. They found Emma's car parked on the roadside, the doors locked, the windshield covered in a layer of frost so thick it looked like white glass. Inside, her purse lay on the passenger seat, her gloves tucked beside it, as if she had stepped out only for a moment, never returning. Her phone was not there, and her charger was missing too. In the glove compartment, they found a small notebook with her handwriting, to-do lists, reminders to call her sister, small notes about grocery items, and a slip of paper with a date circled. The day she was supposed to return to work. A storm was moving in from the west, bringing with it icy winds and heavy snow, and the sheriff knew they had to act quickly if they wanted to find any trace of Emma before the storm erased the evidence. Volunteers gathered, forming a search party, moving out in lines with bright orange vests that stood out against the white landscape, calling Emma's name as they pushed through the drifts. The cold bit at their faces, and the forest felt endless, each tree standing like a silent sentinel, branches heavy with snow that fell in soft, soundless clumps. Near the cabin, searchers found footprints that circled the building, some leading toward the woods, others vanishing where the snow had fallen heavier. They found a coffee mug shattered near the porch steps, frozen coffee staining the snow brown, with small, bright spots of something red they thought might be blood. Inside the cabin, they found it cold and empty, the fireplace unused, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and cold ashes. A single mattress was on the floor, with a heavy blanket pulled halfway across it, and on a small table beside it was a photo of Emma, smiling in front of the forest, pinned under a cracked glass frame. Daniel was questioned by deputies, standing near the cabin, with his hands buried in his coat pockets, his breath forming clouds that drifted and disappeared. He told them that Emma had decided to leave for a few days to clear her mind after an argument, that she had refused a ride into town, saying she needed to walk and think. But some of the volunteers remembered seeing Daniel's truck parked near the woods late at night, its lights off, the engine idling quietly in the dark, just before Emma went missing. The storm clouds gathered, gray and heavy, pressing down on the land as the first flakes began to fall, and the search was called off for the night, the wind rising as the snow began to cover every trail, every footprint, every sign of Emma's last steps into the cold silence of the forest. 3 days after the storm finally passed, the snow lay deep across the Montana forest, its surface smooth and untouched in the early morning light. The cold was sharp enough to cut into the lungs with every breath, and the sky was painfully clear, the sun reflecting off the snow in a blinding glare. A hunter, moving carefully through the drifts with his rifle slung across his shoulder, was searching for tracks when he noticed a splash of color against the endless white. A single strand of red caught on a branch, fluttering slightly in the breeze. It was Emma's scarf, the bright red standing out like a wound against the pale world around it. The hunter called the sheriff immediately, his voice shaking as he gave the location deep in a clearing near a cluster of fallen trees. Deputies arrived, their boots crunching in the snow, moving slowly, each step sinking into the powder until they reached the place where the scarf lay half buried. Nearby, they found Emma's body curled near the trunk of a tree, her arms tucked beneath her, as if she had been trying to protect herself from the cold that had settled into her bones. Her hair was frozen, strands stuck to the snow, and her face was pale, eyes closed, lips blue, the snow around her disturbed only by the faint marks of where she had fallen. Near her body, searchers found her phone. The screen cracked, the battery dead from the cold. But when they turned it over in their hands, they saw that the camera had been open when it died. Later, when it was charged at the station, the last image Emma had taken was recovered, a blurry photo of the forest with the shapes of trees barely visible through falling snow. But in the corner of the frame, there was what looked like the shape of a figure standing in the distance, dark against the white, too far to see clearly. But there, watching, the medical examiner worked quickly, and the report came back with details that sent a cold shiver through everyone who read it. Emma had suffered blunt force trauma to the side of her head, leaving a deep bruise beneath her hair, but it was not enough to kill her. The cause of death was hypothermia, her body shutting down slowly in the freezing cold, while she was unconscious or too weak to move. Her fingers were scraped, showing she had tried to move or drag herself at some point, leaving small grooves in the snow that the storm had nearly erased. The town felt the weight of her death heavily. People who had seen Emma laughing in the diner, buying groceries, or walking with Daniel, could not stop thinking about her lying in the snow alone, the cold, swallowing her last breaths. Rumors began to grow quickly in the quiet of the small town. Whispers passed between neighbors at the gas station or while standing in line for coffee. Some said Emma had found out about Daniel's troubles with money, how he had been in debt and hiding it, how he was not the man he claimed to be. Others remembered seeing Daniel's truck parked near the forest at odd hours, the headlights off, the engine running softly as the snow fell, but there was no clear evidence yet, only questions that circled like the cold wind around the cabin. In the forest, why had Emma gone into the woods? Had she been running from something? Or had she been chased? The photo on her phone, the shape in the snow, the bruises on her head, and the frozen silence where she was found, all became pieces of a puzzle that no one could yet fit together. Emma's family demanded answers, but the snow-covered ground was quiet, holding its secrets tightly beneath the cold, waiting for the truth to come to the surface. The investigation into Emma's death moved slowly at first, hindered by the heavy snow and the small-town silence that seemed to protect secrets under its cold blanket. But as the days passed, fragments of evidence began to appear, each piece adding weight to the suspicion that Emma had not simply wandered into the forest and succumbed to the cold by accident. The sheriff's team returned to the cabin, moving carefully through the snow, checking the windows, doors, and the surrounding ground for anything the storm might have hidden. It was there, inside the cabin, that they found a dark stain on one of the unfinished beams near the door, a faint smear that testing would confirm as Emma's blood. Her fingerprints were found on the inside of the door and along the edge of a broken window frame, as if she had been trying to leave or hold herself steady. In Daniel's garage, hidden behind boxes of tools and rusted car parts, deputies found Emma's missing phone charger wrapped in a towel stained with something dark. They also discovered a pair of gloves tucked under a workbench, and testing confirmed traces of Emma's blood along the stitching of the left glove's thumb. A small jewelry box was found beneath insulation in the attic of Daniel's small house, and inside was Emma's necklace, the one she wore every day, a tiny silver locket that her sister had given her, which she never removed willingly. The townspeople began to remember details they had not thought important before. A neighbor reported seeing Daniel's truck near the cabin late at night, parked with its lights off, the engine idling, before moving slowly toward the woods. Another local recalled seeing Daniel's truck parked behind the diner where Emma worked, even after closing, with Daniel sitting inside, staring at the window, waiting for the lights to go out. Each small testimony, each recollection, added another layer to the growing suspicion that Emma's death was not an accident, but a result of fear and violence that had been hiding in the quiet corners of her new life. Phone records became a key piece of the case. Despite claiming he had been home early and asleep on the night Emma went missing, Daniel's phone had pinged near the forest, close to the cabin, at least 6 times between midnight and 3 in the morning. There were also repeated calls to Emma's phone, calls that Daniel had not mentioned in his initial statements to the sheriff, each unanswered, each one a reminder of the last attempts at contact before her phone went dead in the cold. Daniel's calm demeanor began to crack when he was questioned again, his explanations shifting, small details changing. He admitted they had argued about money, about Emma wanting to leave, about the cabin they were supposed to build together. He claimed she had walked away into the snow, refusing his pleas to come back, insisting she needed to be alone. But with each inconsistency, the deputies pressed harder, piecing together the timeline of that night, the phone records, the blood, and the evidence hidden in the places Daniel thought no one would find. It was enough for the sheriff to sign the warrant for Daniel's arrest. The charge was second-degree murder, the accusation that he had struck Emma in anger, leaving her injured and alone in the freezing snow, where she died while he returned to his truck and drove away. The town watched in quiet shock as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, the sound of the cold wind sweeping across the streets as people locked their doors, wondering how close they had been to something so dark, hidden beneath the promise of love and the silence of falling snow. The courthouse was filled with a heavy quiet when the trial began, the kind of silence that sits in the bones of a small town when the people they know are called to account for something unthinkable. The snow still lined the streets outside, frozen hard into gray piles, as if the winter itself refused to let go of Emma's story. Her family sat in the front row, holding each other's hands, eyes fixed on the judge while Emma's photo was displayed on a screen. Her bright smile and red scarf, a sharp contrast to the cold facts being read aloud. The prosecution built its case piece by piece, showing the bloodstains inside the unfinished cabin, the smear on the beam, the gloves found in Daniel's garage, and the locket hidden in his attic. They presented the phone records that placed Daniel near the cabin the night Emma died, despite his earlier claims that he had been asleep. They played the last voicemails Emma had left for her sister days before her death, messages filled with small, hesitant fear, words about wanting to leave but feeling trapped, notes about money, and her growing discomfort with how quickly Daniel's temper would flare over small things. The messages became a quiet testimony of a life closing in around her, each word a fragment of Emma's final days. The photo recovered from Emma's broken phone was shown next. The blurry image of snow-covered trees, a dark shape in the corner, standing between the trunks, watching. The prosecution argued that the photo was Emma's final attempt to document what was happening, that she knew someone was following her, that she felt the need to capture it even as the cold and fear pressed down on her. Daniel's defense tried to argue that it was all a tragic accident, that Emma had run into the woods after an argument, that she had slipped, hit her head, and that Daniel had panicked, leaving her there in the cold. believing she would wake up and return. They argued that there was no intention to kill, that Daniel had simply made a terrible mistake out of fear. But the evidence of his repeated lies, the hidden locket, the stained gloves, and the patterns of control in his past behavior weighed heavily against him. Witnesses testified about seeing Daniel's truck near the cabin, about the late night drives, about how Emma had seemed more withdrawn in the days before her disappearance, her eyes darting to the door whenever it opened, her smiles becoming smaller and forced. The cold days of the trial dragged on, with the town gathering outside the courthouse, waiting for any word on what would happen next. After days of closing arguments and tense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentence, the cold light from the windows falling across Daniel's face as he stared ahead, unmoving, as if he could not quite believe the moment had arrived. When it was over, the family walked out into the cold, the wind brushing against them, the snow crunching under their feet, carrying the weight of their loss with them. The cabin remained in the woods, empty and unfinished, a ghost of Emma's hopes lingering in its dark windows. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the whispers of a story that had started with the promise of love and ended beneath the snow, reminding everyone in that quiet town that trust can become a weapon in the wrong hands, and that sometimes the cold is not the only thing to fear when winter falls.